Alright, here's the deal. We're gonna do this whole story of Beatrix the bureaucratic thing in exactly 8 chapters, each no longer than 600 words. So get ready. Chapter 1: The Alphabetized Nursery. Beatrix was born in the royal filing wing of the Palace of Legerminster, amid the rustle of parchment and the scent of warm ink. Beatrix attended the Royal Academy of Form Filling, where her class presentations came with appendices, implementing a royal suggestion box numbered, monitored, and laminated, mandated that all royal proclamations be issued in triplicate. She arrived with 17 identical binders labeled Peace Proposals, Index.Q. The Prussian king fell asleep halfway through her opening flowchart. She once accidentally declared war on Luxembourg after misfiling a trade agreement under minor border invasions. It was resolved when she personally visited Luxembourg and apologized using a 48-slide presentation. The eternal footnote. Beatrix passed away at her desk, surrounded by forms she had already pre-filled for her own burial. The tombstone reads, "Here lies Queen Beatrix the Bureaucratic, indexed, filed, and at rest. Please refer to Section 3C for commemorative details." Her death certificate was filed under B for bureaucracy and of replaced knighthood ceremonies with mandatory ethics training and a 12-page application form. Just wait till I tell you about the time King Frederick the Fearsome got lost in a forest. Renamed all royal horses after administrative virtues, she had one pet, a tortoise named Footnote. It wore a collar with a disclaimer, which features exhibits such as the paperclip through the ages, historic binders of Europe, royal ink blotches, a retrospective. Her final royal address was delivered in perfect alphabetical order from agriculture to zoning errors. Visitors were required to sign a waiver before petting it. When Footnote briefly escaped, Beatrix issued a kingdom-wide turtle hunt code named Slow But Inevitable. He was found napping on her throne. She awarded him a tiny medal for exemplary quietness. The royal treasury adopted her budget of balanced boredom, which allotted funding strictly based on paper usage. On Coronation Day, she delayed proceedings by 4 hours after discovering the robe inventory did not match the embroidered regalia register. She refused to proceed until the missing sleeve was accounted for. In year 14 of her reign, a terrible scandal erupted. The royal office ran out of number 2 pencils. Chaos reigned. Ministers tried writing in crayon. Parliament passed laws in interpretive dance. Beatrix responded swiftly. She summoned a National Pencil Council, instituted PencilCon, and personally inventoried every writing instrument in the realm. To this day, the Graphite Act of 1711 remains her proudest legislative achievement. It was eventually found in a soup tureen. She became student prefect not by popularity, but by filing Form PFO01 13 times with minor clarifications. Her classmates nicknamed her the Duchess of Due Dates. In the staff room, they called her a pain in the royal posterior. At age 12, she staged a quiet but effective revolution against the headmaster by submitting a 412-page document titled "Why Detentions Should Be More Detention-Like, a Policy Review." He didn't make it to the end of summer break. The headmaster resigned with a note. She buried me in bullet points. Her birth certificate was signed, stamped, wax-sealed, and triple-copied before her mother even cut the umbilical cord. Nurses noted that Beatrix's first cry resembled the phrase, "request for clarification." She was the only child of King Algernon the Almost Awake and Queen Sybil the Spreadsheeted, rulers best known for introducing quarterly crown-polishing reviews. Growing up, Beatrix preferred the company of ledgers to ladies-in-waiting and organized her dolls by size, shape, and function in a 42-page document titled Dolls of the Realm, an Inventory and Analysis. By age 2, she insisted that her toys be shelved in alphabetical and chronological order. Teddy bears went in Section T, subsection 1, 1. When given finger paint, she produced color-coded flowcharts. A nanny once tried to tell Beatrix a fairy tale. Beatrix interrupted. This story lacks footnotes. Chapter 2, Schooling and the Great Binder Rebellion. Chapter 3, Ascension to the Throne. Beatrix became queen at 29 after her father misplaced the crown during a nap. Her first act. Chapter 4, The Age of Organizational Reform. Beatrix's reign saw sweeping changes, introduced the royal document decimal system. Chapter 5, International Relations and Misunderstandings. Beatrix was invited to a peace conference in Prussia. Chapter 6, The Pencil Protocol Crisis. Chapter 7, Beatrix and the Royal Pets. Chapter 8, Legacy of Paper and Precision. Toward her later years, Beatrix established the National Museum of Filing Epilogue. Look at that. Now, if you think that was something... And now, Part 2, The Middle Years, Efficiency, Elevation, and Excessive Ink. Chapter 9, The Royal Pencils Inventory. Scandal, though the Graphite Act of 1711 technically resolved the shortage. Suspicions arose in 1713 when the royal audit revealed that 32 pencils were unaccounted for. Queen Beatrix was aghast. She summoned Lord Scribbleton, head of stationery security, Baroness Erisima, keeper of the royal rubbers, and Sir Drosselot, minister of doodles. What followed was known as the Graphite Tribunal, where each minister had to 1. Explain their recent pencil usage, 2. Submit handwriting samples, and 3. Recreate doodles found in the margins of an unauthorized pie chart. After 2 weeks, it was discovered that the missing pencils had been accidentally baked into the royal birthday cake due to a misfiled recipe titled Victoria Sponge. Beatrix forgave the chef, but instituted the no writing implements near batter policy, still in force today. Chapter 10, The Filing Cabinet Rebellion of 1717. Beatrix took this as a direct insult. Thus began the duel of documentation, where each queen attempted to out-organize the other by submitting proposals in record time, inventing ever more specific acronyms, performing live indexing to orchestral accompaniment. Ultimately, Margolin conceded defeat after Beatrix produced a 4-volume compendium titled Why You Lost, complete with holographic bookmarks and an annotated bibliography. Horrified citizens gathered to burn the notices, not because of their content, but because of their font. Beatrix launched Operation Typeface Purge, commissioning the Royal Typeface Inspectorate to investigate. And now, Part 3, The Final Years, which includes Queen Beatrix's unexpected obsession with labeling clouds, the construction of the National Paperweight Cathedral, and her final retirement to the Isle of Index Cards. They found sabotage by a disgruntled apprentice who believed royal decrees should express more whimsy. Ever since ascending to the throne, she's taken great joy in organizing the clouds, which has caused some problems. When the Royal Meteorological Office warned of an impending storm, Beatrix interrupted their report with, "Good news, everyone. Looks like we've got ourselves a nice cumulonimbus. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must dash off a memo about how delightful it is to be alive during such tempestuous weather." Days turned into weeks, and soon Londoners looked up in the sky not just for weather, but for the Queen's next pronouncement. The new monarch, her nephew George, has inherited a much more streamlined kingdom, one where paperwork moves through channels with relative ease. But the biggest change isn't the efficiency of government, it's the Queen's sudden disappearance. Having returned all of the library books she deborrowed in the previous century and solved every crossword puzzle in the Guardian archives, Beatrix left behind a note explaining her absence. She'd gone back to school. Having misplaced her glasses on several occasions and not wanting to burden her staff with the task of searching for them, she decided to educate herself about lower vision so that she could better organize her personal effects. As of the writing of this episode, she's still away. sending postcards to her favorite ministers with facts about different eye conditions on each one. Someday soon, she returned to London, but until then, the Isle of Index cards was very well organized, thank you. Very much. An anonymous pamphlet titled, "Stop Filing the Clouds, Your Majesty," failed to dissuade her, but a subsequent meteor shower did. It was then she realized she had become too much of a stickler for order and devoted her remaining years to loosening up. He was sentenced to 8 years of formatting spreadsheets in silence. The palace, burdened with over 14,000 filing cabinets, began to groan under the weight of Beatrix's expanding documentation. Then one night, with a thunderous metallic roar, the West Wing filing cabinets toppled over like dominoes, crushing 3 footmen and mildly alarming a royal parrot. But while her eye was no longer quite as sharp as it once was, she found comfort in the daily grind of organizing. The solution came unexpectedly from Sir Reginald Stoneleigh, the Earl of Grindstone, whose family business created heavy, slow-to-crack industrial paperweights. To move his product, he proposed building a cathedral dedicated to the paperweight, an extravagant domed structure with revolving arches that would require hundreds of the heaviest weights to keep the whole thing from toppling over. Beatrix loved it. Soon ground was broken, though many citizens questioned the timing of such an expensive project in times of hardship. Beatrix saw it as a symbol of stability, a way to lift people's spirits and remind them that even when times are tough, there's always tomorrow, hopefully in a slightly less tempestuous climate. So Beatrix established the Royal Department of Tea Classification, dividing teas into infusions of moral fortitude, steeps of strategic clarity, and liquids of last resort. Each royal advisor was assigned a blend to match their responsibilities. Chancellor of Taxes, Black Assam twice steeped. Minister of Internal Affairs, white jasmine, room temperature, consumed silently. Mistakenly offering her oolong on budget day resulted in an advisor's reassignment to the Ministry of Redundancies and Backup Departments. A reformist group calling themselves the Clerks Without Borders declared the Queen's paper-based obsession tyrannical. Events included competitive hole punching, pie charts made of actual pie, and children dressing as their favorite economic sectors. Her address to the people, titled "This Fiscal Year in Review," narrated with modest enthusiasm, was presented as a musical performed by civil servants wearing tabards labeled "Deficit" and "Projected Surplus." Critics called it a triumph of monotony. They chained themselves to the inkwells. Beatrix negotiated peace using her legendary conflict resolution through archival sorting technique. She convinced them that properly indexed rebellion forms had never been filed. The rebels relented. She knighted their leader as Sir Misfile, the only person in history to have disruption of chronological order engraved on a medal. Chapter 11. The Annual Report Festival in year 20 of her reign. Queen Beatrix declared a national holiday, the Festival of Annual Reports. Chapter 12. The Duel of Documentation. A challenge emerged from the distant nation of Scriblovia, whose Queen Margolin the Marginally Efficient boasted 7 fewer steps in her document approval process. Chapter 13. The Department of Tea Classification. No matter how structured her realm, chaos still brewed in the palace kitchens. Chapter 14. The Great Misprinting of 1723. One quiet morning, disaster struck. A printer in the Ministry of Edicts began to print every decree in Comic Sans. Would you like to continue with Part 3, The Final Years, which includes Queen Beatrix's unexpected obsession with labeling clouds, the construction of the National Paperweight Cathedral, and her final retirement to the Isle of Index cards? If you're enjoying this ridiculous historical fantasy and would like to support our work, please consider supporting us. Chapter 15, Cloudy with a Chance, Ophonomia. The year is 1728, the location London. The problem, Queen Beatrix can't stop staring at the sky. Chapter 16. The National Paperweight Cathedral for the last decade. The papers in Beatrix's office had sat atop a single mountain range, precariously balanced and desperate need of a sort. Chapter 17. Retirement to the Isle of Index Cards. The year is 1734. The place. A small cottage on the Isle of Index Cards, a remote speck of land off the coast of Britain. Beatrix is gone. Once upon a time, there was a queen who loved organization. Not just any old organization, mind you, but a very particular kind of organization that involved color-coded folders, right angles, but upon surveying the royal armory, they realized they were perilously low on cheese, catapults, and France. You won't want to miss a single delicious second of it. So grab a royal quill and get ready for Kingdom Come. Her first act as queen was to issue a series of proclamations including greater than all royal protests must be filed in duplicate. In 1709, looking to streamline government services, Queen Beatrix established the Ministry of Binders, tasked with crafting a comprehensive multi-ring binder covering all aspects of royal bureaucracy. Everything seemed to be working perfectly, and she had nothing left to organize except the pencils in her private collection. In order to enjoy this hobby without letting down her people, she created the semi-annual pencil policy, whereby she would spend every other spring and fall enacting major changes to the kingdom's stationery supplies. Every time she tried to describe something, she would inevitably come up against a noun or adjective that hadn't been invented yet. That's why in 1725, at the ripe old age of 76, she published a 128-page book of her own devising called Peon, which contained not just new words, but new grammatical rules and syntax. Most notably, Peon introduced the concept of the definite article in English, allowing speakers to say the sky instead of a sky, and 3,212 documented minor policy adjustments. Queen Beatrix declared her work sufficiently footnoted. From her island home, Beatrix continued to micromanage the kingdom, issuing decrees like hermit crabs are hereby banned from royal beaches due to disruptive burrowing habits. Her mausoleum inscription reads, indexed, filed, remembered in orderly fashion. Today, her name lives on in Beatrixian Filing Systems Limited, the Queen's National Hole Punch Museum, and of course, the annual parade of stationery held each May in Ledgerminster, where children dress as various office supplies and chant. Everything in its place. And though her system may seem draconian to modern ears, it's hard to argue with the results. Thanks to Beatrix, we now live in a world that makes sense. Everything has its place. Nothing is missing, mislabeled, or broken. And that is a beautiful thing. But her heart wasn't in it, and eventually she stopped altogether. In 1730, she wrote her final list, a simple set of instructions for her own funeral. They were straightforward and practical, including requests like ensure proper ventilation and do not allow pigeons inside the cathedral. But one line stood out both for its specificity and disturbing implications. All laughter must be filed under unscheduled events. All joy must be submitted for review. It was the closest she ever came to expressing emotion, and the only time she broke her vow of incessant chatter. She retired to a quiet estate on the Isle of Index Cards, a small, rectangular island off the coast of Ledgerminster where every house was sorted by postal code and smell. There, she lived with her tortoise, footnote, and a staff of 6 clerks who voluntarily took vows of silence, motionlessness, and non-disruption. Unfortunately, Peon didn't catch on. People couldn't be bothered to learn new words, and even the English Channel refused to adopt the term, the English Channel. But Beatrix didn't care. She had discovered a new passion, the Cloud Classification Initiative. Some of her most famous policies included greater than all writing utensils shall hereafter be stored in vertical orientation. In her twilight years, Beatrix began to gaze out the palace windows with a sigh, not from longing, but from categorical frustration. How, she asked, can the clouds be allowed to roam unlabeled? Thus was born the Royal Atmospheric Categorization Bureau. Within months, her specially trained cloud spotters had tagged 1 million cumulus clouds with sequential numbers and letters. And by summer's end, a squadron of cloud police were issuing warnings to thunderclouds for auditory disruption without permit. By September, the morning mist had received a formal caution and a pamphlet titled "So UV Become a Weather Event." Over the next few years, Beatrix's team worked to classify every kind of cloud, from cirrus to stratus to cumulonimbus. The project consumed her, and she threw herself into it with characteristic zeal, going so far as to erect metal towers across the kingdom to give her observers a better view of the skies. Eventually, though, her ministers put a stop to it, recognizing that she had gone too far. For what? Clouds would forever remain unlabeled. In the interest of symmetry, all newly commissioned quills shall be paired with matching ink bottles of equal capacity. But while the cloud initiative failed, Beatrix found a new outlet for her energies in the form of stone. It started innocently enough. She began taking walks around the city, stopping to admire interesting buildings and statues. Then one day she had an idea. Why not create a building unlike any other, one that would symbolize her greatest hits? And so she did. In 1728, she commissioned the construction of the National Cathedral of Paperweights, a monumental marble structure shaped like a desk. Inside, she placed a nave lined with magnified staplers, choir pews built from pressed ledger books, and stained glass windows depicting scenes from her greatest violent triumphs, including the time she located an invoice from 1699 using only her nose and intuition. At the center sat the grand paperweight, a 900-pound orb of glass, containing a single perfectly centered receipt for royal paper purchases. Pilgrims visited annually to place their own small paperweights at the altar and mutter the sacred phrase, "Let not the winds of chaos scatter our memos." It was here that Beatrix spent her final years, surrounded by the tangible evidence of a life well ordered. And the highly controversial greater than round pencils are hereby banned unless authorized by royal decree. Each policy lasted exactly 6 months, during which time Beatrix would enjoy watching her bureaucrats struggle to comply. Then every November, she would switch things up, giving her people 6 months to adapt to a whole new set of stationery restrictions. The pencil policy gave her something to look forward to every year and made her subjects appreciate how good they had it when she was messing with their pencils. Led by Beatrix's personal secretary, Horace Hackworth, the ministry spent 7 years compiling 17,000 pages of legislation, royal proclamations, historical records, background noise regulations, best practices for whistling while working, and the answers to 15 different versions of the question, "What is a query?" That's why, in 1722, she founded the Ministry of Quiet, dedicated to ensuring an optimal level of auditory stimulation throughout the kingdom. Every morning, ministry employees would travel to various locations around Ledgerminster, measuring the decibel level of everything from church bells to goose droppings, barking dogs to babies, and adding or subtracting sound as necessary. By 1724, they had reduced the average ambient noise of the kingdom by 2 decibels. But some saw this as a threat to their autonomy. In particular, the nation's organ grinders formed a mob and demanded the restoration of ambient noise, claiming that an optimal level of auditory stimulation deprived them of their livelihood and worse, deprived the kingdom of its culture. After weeks of protest, Beatrix agreed to restore the grinders' freedom of racket, establishing the Ministry of Quiet's first department of ambivalent noise, which has since expanded to include a variety of other professions, such as blacksmiths, lutes, streetcars, and the sky. The resulting 18-inch thick binnacle of binders remains the supreme law of Ledgerminster to this very day. Citizens are encouraged to adopt linear notions. and the ever-relevant greater than beware of dog and her fire. Then, seeking to instill order throughout the land, she enacted policies such as greater than farmers shall number their crops sequentially and alphabetically, alpha crop being acorn squash and bravo crop being abersons. Traders must list all wares for sale in ascending order, beginning with the first item alphabetically. And perhaps most importantly, Her Majesty's Royal Mail shall be delivered according to a schedule affixed to the relevant wall in a font no smaller than 18 point. Initially, these decrees were unpopular. Merchants complained that alphabetical acorns interfered with seasonal sales, and farmers worried that listing livestock would take all day. But over time, they came to appreciate the efficiencies of Beatrix's system. And so did everyone else. Under Beatrix's steady hand, Ledgerminster became known as the most orderly nation on earth, attracting visitors from around the world, including one Charles de Brosa, who returned to France to write, "I have seen the future of administration, and it is female." So Beatrix set about fixing that. Part 1 of this cheese-assisted history will focus on the early life of Queen Beatrix, how she came to power, and the many ways she improved the functioning of a kingdom in preparation for war. In a filing cabinet so large it required its own zip code. This was Queen Beatrix the First of Ledgerminster. Her mother went into labor while delivering an impassioned speech about the need for labeled storage containers, causing Beatrix to enter the world via an emergency filing cabinet. From the moment she could speak, Beatrix spoke. In fact, she never stopped speaking until 2 days before her death. In that time, she never uttered a word that wasn't carefully considered or alphabetized. As a young princess, she arranged the royal library by subject and subsubject, using colored inks to denote cross-reference topics. While other nobles engaged in swordplay, Beatrix played with stacks of index cards. And instead of learning courtly love songs, she composed an epic poem titled Lech Mich im Arsch, which was banned and then quietly added to the royal library under the title Ode to Oral Hygiene. Beatrix was the only child of King Alaric II and his trophy wife, Griselda, a former jester whose face had been permanently frozen in a silent scream by an experimental Botox treatment. King Alaric was a tyrant who ruled through fear, and everyone hated him, especially Griselda. And so, upon his untimely demise in a jousting accident involving a rogue chicken, Griselda used her considerable influence to secure the throne for Beatrix. Now, Ledgerminster was a peaceful, if somewhat beige kingdom until one day when the king decided he wanted to build an enormous catapult to fling cheese at France. Part 2 will cover her legendary exploits in the cheese industry, and Part 3 will detail the twilight years of her reign. Chapter 1: Origins of Orderliness. Beatrix was born amidst chaos. Chapter 2: Royal Proclamation. Upon assuming the throne at age 28, Beatrix wasted no time getting to work. Chapter 3: The Binnacle of Binders. Chapter 4: Pencil Policy. By 1718, Beatrix was becoming bored with ruling. Chapter 5: The Ministry of Quiet. Beatrix understood the importance of background noise, having grown up in the relative calm of a filing cabinet. Chapter 6: The Great Pan. As Beatrix aged, she grew increasingly frustrated by the limitations of language. Chapter 7: The Cloud Classification Initiative. Chapter 8: The National Cathedral of Paperweights. Chapter 9: Retirement to the Isle of Index Cards. At age 77, after 48 years of rule. Chapter 10: Final Decrees and the Last List. Chapter 11: Epilogue, Legacy, and Ledger. On April 12, 1732, Queen Beatrix died peacefully in her filing chair, surrounded by stacks of precisely 1-inch thick folders. Thanks for watching. If you liked this video, you might also like our others. Wonderful. Let's fully round out Queen Beatrix the Bureaucratic Saga with a few last scenes. posthumous honors, and the continued ripple of her legacy in the hilariously quiet corners of history. When the Queen died, she left behind a will longer than the royal proclamation on stink bug containment, which detailed her wishes for a map of where to scatter her ashes, specifically into individual brass inkwells. As Brother Bartholomew carefully unrolled a faded piece of parchment, he noticed something shocking. Hidden among the embossed lettering was a staple. It was bent at a 45-degree angle, the standard alignment of the royal bureaucracy. Some viewed her as a tyrant of tedium, a goddess of grids, or a woman who simply loved her hole puncher too much. But all agreed she brought calm to chaos, clarity to confusion, and index tabs to everything else. The ledger hall, where the Queen had received her first filing cabinet, was now a museum gift shop, the perfect place to commemorate her bizarre legacy. On the wall hung a modest bronze plaque, Queen Beatrix the Bureaucratic. She ruled not with fire nor sword, but with folders, fasteners, and formidable forms. Come for the history, stay for the commemorative folders, fasteners, and formidable forms. And below that, some small print. All visitors must sign the guest book in ink, using blue only. Failure to do so may result in mild reclassification. Except that's not how they used to fasten documents back in the days of Beatrix the Bureaucratic. They hadn't invented the stapler yet. This discovery sent shockwaves through the kingdom and reopened old wounds. Some proclaimed it a hidden prophecy left by the Queen herself. Others claimed it was nothing but a moment of whimsy. The debate split the once harmonious order of the archivists into two distinct factions: the standard alignmentists, who refused to touch loose papers lest they become dislodged, and the loose leaf revisionists, who, horrified by the prospect of angering the long-dead Queen, started using paper clips instead. The schism threatened to tear the kingdom apart until the abbot intervened. He hosted a grand reconciliation banquet, during which a ceremonial 3-hole punch was shared by both parties, signifying a return to unity and balance. At least that's what everyone told Vimes happened. He never really bought that story. Every time he heard it, he imagined the assembled bureaucrats recoiling in horror at the sight of a loose paper clip, and the abbot bravely stepping forward with a rusty old punch. That was a story worth telling. Detailed instructions for mourning attire, which was to be grayscale only with no frills. Nearly 300 years after the death of Queen Beatrix, a park ranger spotted a familiar shape slowly crossing the grounds of the National Budget Gardens, a tortoise. To be precise, it was Footnote the tortoise, alive, slow, and mostly uninterested. Somehow he'd outlived 7 monarchs, managed to get accidentally knighted after mistaking the royal entrance for the royal sewer, and become the subject of 17 children's books, all titled Footnote's Adventure in the Margins. But he was getting pretty old and tired of being legend. One day he wandered into a printing press and died happily nestled between 2 tax ledgers. He was buried with full honors, even though he didn't really care. His tombstone was engraved with the words, "Faithful, fileable, forever footnoted." And somewhere in the palace archives, a dusty box contained the remains of another legend, the King's Dragon, along with the label, to be released only in the event of absolute emergency or dragon-related paperwork backlog. A ranked list of her favorite fonts, which included number 1, Garamond, and number 2, whatever was used in 1703 Memo 48, Rev 2. It took 4 hours to read the will, though perhaps more surprisingly, it passed without a single interruption from the Queen's advisors trying to implement any of its early provisions. And the final clause simply read, "Please alphabetize my mourners by surname and subdivide into emotional intensity tiers." Mourners, it seems, were expected to line up according to a very specific set of criteria. Lord Vidinari placed himself firmly in Tier 4 of emotional intensity, while simultaneously being first in line because he had the surname, a through L assigned to him. He didn't particularly care for this level of organization, but then again, he wasn't the one who left the bulk of his estate to the Royal Society for the Prevention of Mess. Part 4. Beyond Beatrix, Her Afterlife in Paper and Policy. Chapter 19. The Royal Will and the 4-Hour Reading. People found comfort in the Queen's vision of order, so much so that her obsessive cataloging and cross-referencing sparked a movement known as the Neo-Clerical Revival. New buildings were constructed that looked like giant file cabinets. Parents gave their children names like Tabby Divider or Indent Cooper, and a new form of poetry arose that consisted entirely of bulletin lists. Meanwhile, Vimes returned to his old post at the watch house. One day, Lord Vetinari approached him with a clipboard and a stack of papers. "Have you ever wanted to join the clergy?" he asked Vimes. "I haven't," said Vimes, "but if it keeps me off the streets, I might make an exception." So in time, Vimes became a neo-cleric, an ordained minister, and even the founder of a small denomination that worshipped a vaguely humanoid deity whose body was made of stacks of paper and whose eyes were hole punches. They called him the Supreme Organizer, or Sam for short. In honor of this new development, Vetinari presented Vimes with a silver pocket watch, which promptly fell apart in his hands. "Oh, that's right," said Vimes. "I forgot you weren't meant to actually touch things." Then Vetinari did something unusual for a bureaucrat. He smiled. Chapter 20. The Bureaucratic Renaissance. After her death, a wave of adoration mixed with mild exhaustion swept the realm. Chapter 21. The Cult of the Coded Staple. About 100 years later, a pair of monks were deciphering ancient scrolls in the royal archive. Chapter 22. The Return of Footnote. Chapter 23. Closing the Ledger. Centuries later, when robots ran the kingdom's paperwork and clouds came with built-in QR codes, scholars still studied the reign of Queen Beatrix.